Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my review for the 2025 Australian Grand Prix, the first race of the year. What a chaotic race, so much action, so much drama, lots of crashes as well. So let's get started. Race started with Norris on pole, Piastri P2. Pit lane starts for both Lawson and for Behrman, opting to change the setup of the car. And after park permit conditions, of course, you're required to do that. Start from the pit lane if you do that. So all drivers were starting on intermediate tires, Stroll opting for wets. And as we get away for the formation lap, we have our first crash of the season in a Grand Prix. And unfortunately, it is one of the rookies. And this would not be the first time, this would not be the only time, I should say, that a rookie would end up crashing today. And this unfortunate rookie was none other than Isack Hadjar. Just lit up the tires going through turn 2 of the formation lap, of course, so they're not even pushing. Looked like he just was trying to weave, trying to get heat in the tires, ended up losing the rear and went straight into the barriers at turn 2. So that means we had an aborted start, and the start would eventually start about 15 minutes after we were originally supposed to get going. I think Stroll as well opted to switch from wets to inters after that aborted start. So again, I think definitely the smart decision, as was that the track was definitely not wet enough for full wet tires. So we got started. Norris keeps the lead into turn 1, but Verstappen, good start for him. Looked like he was trying to get past both McLarens, but they kind of boxed him in there. But Verstappen is able to get ahead of Piastri at turn 2, so he moves up a position and splits the two McLarens. Then we get our second crash of the race, and that is unfortunately our second rookie out of the race as well. Jack Doohan, unfortunately, a driver under a lot of pressure, crashes on the straight from turns 5 to turn 6. Just put the car on the white lines. If you've ever gone cycling when it's wet out, you know that if you basically put your tires on those white lines, they can be very, very slippery. And because this is a street circuit, the white lines here are extremely slippery for F1 cars. Unfortunately for Doohan, just went on those lines and crashed pretty heavily into the wall and then kind of careened back onto the track. And that brought out the safety car. Now, while the safety car comes out, drivers are slowing down. We had our second crash of the opening lap, and our second crash, second crash from the opening lap. And unfortunately, this time, not a rookie. Carlos Sainz, driving for his new team, crashes at the final corner, just lost the rear and ends up going backwards into the wall at the final corner. So that safety car took quite a while, as we basically had to clear two cars. And because they were both in pretty awkward spots, they weren't near any of the openings where the cranes would usually come out. So they actually had to bring a flatbed trucks out to get clear of both of those cars away. And he comes on the radio as well, blaming a power surge for that crash. So we get going on lap 5. Lawson and Ocon both pit. Actually, no, the safety car is not in at this point, but lap 5, Lawson and Ocon both pit for new intermediate tires. And lap 7, the safety car ends with a pretty clean restart thereafter. A bunch of drivers, Alonso, Tsunoda, Albon, and I believe Hamilton as well, were all noted for safety car infringements. They were all investigated, but there was no further action for any of those four drivers, so no penalties there. Lap 11, Norris starting to pull away from the field with another fastest lap. And Verstappen, this is kind of where the inters started to basically become an issue. Drivers started to go offline to basically cool the tires down. So you can see here Norris basically going to the inside line on that main straight, try to get some water in the tires to cool them down. That was started to be an issue around 10 laps into the race. Hamilton, lap 13, coming on the radio saying he was really complaining with snaps of oversteer. Not a great race today for Hamilton, Leclerc either. Ferrari's radio strategy team definitely a great race from them today. I think if you go and look at any of the radio compilation from Ferrari's radios after today's race, I think you'll get a chuckle out of quite a few of those radio calls. But the top three, 5.5 seconds in front of Russell, so the top three pulling away quite a bit from the rest of the pack. And lap 15, Hamilton already arguing with his engineer basically asking him to basically try to use K1, and Hamilton basically is telling his engineer to leave him alone and just let him focus on driving. Antonelli overtakes Hulkenberg for P12 at turn 11, so that's our first on-track overtake of the race, but unfortunately soon right thereafter, he loses a position at turn 4, very, very similar to what Russell did in free practice, basically just dipped a wheel on the entry to the corner on the grass and basically went around. Luckily, there's quite a bit of asphalt runoff there, so he basically just spun around, kept out of the wall, and only lost that single position to Hulkenberg. Let's see, where are we? Yeah, okay. And then this is where I think things started to get quite complicated for quite a few drivers as well. So lap 17, Norris starts pulling away from Verstappen, and Piastri behind is starting to kind of put Norris or put Verstappen under pressure. Seems like at this point the McLarens had exceptional race pace, and the other drivers at the front, Verstappen's Red Bull, Russell, and the Mercedes were just not really able to keep up anywhere with the McLaren on pace. And that's kind of where Verstappen was kind of forced into a mistake at turn 11, went a little bit too deep at that corner, got kind of almost went into the grass, but not quite. So really good job of saving it there. But unfortunately lost that P2 that he got off the line to Piastri at that point. Antonelli gets past Hulkenberg again, so gets that position back. And Hamilton at this point, okay, this is where Hamilton and Albon were noted. So I mentioned that already. Lawson overtakes Ocon for P15 at turn 9. Not a great race for Lawson. Really struggled with pace as well. Lap 25, Verstappen is miles behind the two McLarens. So at this point, they were just absolutely miles in front. Unfortunately, for about 10 laps or so, 10 to 15 laps, the timing tower was broken, so they only had the drivers' full names. And usually they would basically shorten it to the 3-letter abbreviation and then have the gaps between each of the cars. But for about 10 to 15 laps, the gaps weren't showing on the timing tower. Wasn't sure if it was some kind of deliberate decision or if it was some kind of issue, but it was very, very hard to tell what the actual gaps were during that stage of the race. But the commentators seem to still be able to have access to the data. So at this point, Verstappen was about 13 seconds off of Piastri, and I think really just kind of cooked his tires, unfortunately, to trying to keep up with them. Lap 27, Piastri at this point, fastest driver on track. He was about a second a lap faster than Norris and gaining on him pretty rapidly. Antonelli also keeps moving up the field. He overtakes Stroll for P11. And lap 29, Piastri starts to put Norris under pressure, but unfortunately that does not come without some controversy as basically Piastri's engineer comes over the radio and basically tells him to hold position until the track dries up. So team orders at McLaren coming into effect less than halfway through the first race of the season. Didn't quite expect that, but at this point of the race, Piastri was definitely the faster of the two McLaren drivers. And at this point, they were basically lapping both Hasses, who were having quite a shocker of an afternoon. But again, I can understand why they would want to hold on until, the track's a bit drier, but at the same time, not great feeling if you're Piastri, especially with what would happen a bit later in the race. Lap 32, Piastri makes a small mistake at turn 6 and drops a couple seconds back from Norris as well. Lap 33, Lawson gets lapped by the McLaren, so on track looked like he was racing them, but unfortunately, no, he was a lap down. Lap 34, this is when our next crash happened, and it is eternal rookie Fernando Alonso, unfortunately this time, crashed quite heavily at turn 7, lost the car on the exit of turn 6, and then basically went spinning around and crashed backwards into the barrier at the entry of turn 7. Unfortunately, another place which was very, very difficult to recover the car from, so they had to get the flatbed truck out, and the safety car took quite a while. Hamilton, Tsunoda, Gasly all pit for slick tires, and it was a pretty interesting mixture of hard tires and medium tires. Traditionally, hard tires you would not really put on on a wet track, especially when it's cold, because often it's very, very hard to get temperature into the hard tires. So I did think that the medium was probably the better choice, but with how difficult it was to overtake, just because of the track, there was basically one dry line, it makes sense why you might want to opt for the tire with a bit more longevity, as we still had about 20 20 odd laps left in the race. Ocon and Behrman decided to stay on inters. That was an interesting choice. Don't know if they were using Ferrari strategy engineers, but yeah, not a great decision. And this is kind of where all the chaos in the pit lane starts to happen. So lap 40, the two Haas's pit. Bortoleto gets noted for a safety car infringement. So basically, the Haas's they get unlapped, and then they decide, because they want to end the safety car, but then they decide to go in the pits, and then they end up a lap down again. So a bit of an interesting one from Haas there. So not great from them. And at this point, all drivers were on slick tires. Bortoleto, unfortunately for him, not really his fault. He's under investigation for an unsafe release, and he was eventually given a 5-second penalty. So lap 41, safety car ends, pretty clear restart. Lap 43, Tsunoda gets ahead of Leclerc. I believe Leclerc spun. So again, a bit of a mistake from him. And Norris, again, another good restart. He has a 2-second gap to Piastri behind. But at this point, there was basically, this had been talked about on the radio for about 10 laps in advance, but there was a cell of rain that was coming, and it was basically, they were saying it was Class 3 rain, so I'm assuming that's pretty heavy rain, and they weren't quite sure if it was going to hit the track or if it was going to miss, and so Norris basically wanted to preemptively go onto intermediate tires, even though the track was suited for slicks. And so the rain did come, and it came towards turn 13, turn 14 first. And unfortunately, one of the tricky things about leading when in this kind of situation is the leaders are the ones who are the first drivers to go through the bad conditions, and they're the ones who have to kind of don't really know what the conditions are going to be like. And this unfortunately catches both McLaren drivers out. Both of them go off track at turn 13. Norris is able to rejoin pretty well and keeps going. Piastri, unfortunately, rejoins, but unfortunately for him, spins on the entry to turn 13 and ends up in the runoff area of the corner, as you can see in the picture. He then basically beaches himself in the grass, and he has to go into a reverse all the way to the escape road, basically at the edge of the runoff area, and he basically ends up last and almost like half a lap down at this point. So really unfortunate for Piastri, pretty small mistake, basically a mistake for both McLaren drivers, but it was just for Norris. He was able to get away with it, but for Piastri, unfortunately, not able to kind of keep control of the car, leaving the gravel trap at turn 13, or at turn 12, I should say, and it unfortunately cost him quite a bit in here. So that was Piastri off. Norris pits right away as well, seeing the conditions change. Verstappen decides not to pit for tires, and then Russell, Albon, Stroll, and a bunch of others all pit for intermediate tires. And this strategy here, pitting right away, I think proved, based on what the end result would end up being, pitting right away for the intermediate tires, I think was the best decision. Piastri pits as well as after eventually getting out of the gravel trap. Verstappen told to stay out an extra lap. Lap 46, so a couple laps later, Verstappen pits finally from his medium tires, and it was quite dicey out there. And in the meantime, while Verstappen's pitting, we have two more cars off, and that is, first we had Bortoleto off at turn 14, just lost the rear on the exit of turn 13, I should say. Lost on I think the exit of turn 12, just went spinning down that short straight, and then ended up in the runoff area with front wing damage, suspension damage as well. So unfortunate for Bortoleto. He had a pretty solid, if not spectacular, weekend. Out qualified Hulkenberg yesterday, but unfortunately for him, ends in a crash. And then our second rookie is out, basically doing almost exact copy of Hadjar's crash from the formation lap, is Liam Lawson, which unfortunately caps off a pretty awful home race weekend. There's obviously no New Zealand Grand Prix, but Australia is the closest thing to it. So Lawson off, Bortoleto off. At this point, we only have two rookies left in the race, after four of them have basically crashed at this point in proceedings. The Ferraris decided to pit under the safety car, so they basically stayed out a lap after Verstappen. They pit under the safety car, and they dropped to 9th and 10th respectively, from 5th and 8th before all of this chaos kicked off. So unfortunately, a really poor strategy decision by Mercedes. I believe Hamilton was ahead of Leclerc as well after Leclerc's spin, kind of in the dicey period before Piastri went off. So again, not great for Ferrari this weekend. Safety car ends. Leclerc gets Hamilton right away. on that restart, so overtakes him for P9 at turn 1. Lap 53, Piastri luckily didn't have any much damage, I should say, and so he starts moving his way up through the field, and he is up to 11th place on lap 53. Lap 54, Gasly goes through a puddle at turn 1, and both Ferraris get ahead of him, so a bit of a small mistake for Gasly, and unfortunately for him, loses 2 positions. Lap 55, Piastri gets ahead of Gasly, so gets his way into the points at turn 3. Lap 56, Verstappen within DRS of Norris, so starting to put pressure on him. That same lap, Antonelli overtakes Albon for P4, and unfortunately for Antonelli, he was under investigation for an unsafe release in the pit lane and was given a 5-second penalty. So even though he was 5th, just with how bunched up the cars was, he would eventually end up losing that 4th place by the end of the race. Last lap, Piastri overtakes Hamilton. Really, really good overtake for him at turn 10. Showed that the car has a ton of pace. And I think at this point, outright favorite for sure at most tracks this season, I should say, at least for the first part until maybe the first and only upgrades come probably at the start of the European season. So there you go. Norris takes the checkered flag, wins the first race of the season, and is now your championship leader for the start of the 2025 F1 season. And that now breaks a streak of Verstappen being the F1 championship leader that goes all the way back to, I believe, sometime very, very early in 2022. I believe one of the French, what were the other two? Back Azerbaijan or Spanish Grand Prix. One of those 3 races, I believe, is where Verstappen took the lead from Leclerc, and he's basically held that championship lead ever since. So that was the longest, I think, period of a driver leading the F1 championship consecutively. But unfortunately, that streak, unfortunately for Verstappen at least, that streak ends today. So, taking a look at your classifications, of course, Lando Norris wins the first race of the season, joining him on the podium, Max Verstappen and George Russell. I think really, really solid drives for all 3 of them. 4th, Albon in the Williams, great result for him. I think does that almost tie his point total for last year? It just might. So great result for him. Really, really good strategy call as well. But even then, he qualified 6th in the dry conditions. So yeah, great race for Albon. 5th, Antonelli on his debut. I think great recovery. Unfortunate for him to get that 5-second penalty. Drops him a couple spots, or drops him just to 1 spot. 6th for Stroll. Not a super spectacular race for Stroll. Kept it clean, kept on the road. Was slower than Alonso for most of the race. But kept it on the road and was there to pick up some points at the end of the race. Same with Hulkenberg, really good job for him. P7 in the Sauber is definitely no small feat, and I do believe that's their best result on track since 2022. So great job for him. 8th Leclerc, 9th Piastri, 10th Hamilton, rounding out the points. Then outside of the points, you have Gasly, Tsunoda, Ocon, and Berman. Your 2 Hasses, despite it being a very chaotic race, finished last and second last. And I think if the car is going to be this slow all year, the fact that their direct main rival, Sauber, picked up 6 points is definitely not great for them. Now for your DNFs, Lawson, Bortoleto, Alonso, Sainz, Doohan, and of course your 1 did not start is Hadjar, who crashed on the formation lap. So again, seemed to be that if you wanted to crash, you had to either be a rookie or be Spanish. So not a great driver if you fit into either of those 2 groups. Now for championship standings, of course, first race, so no big changes here. Of course, no point for fastest lap this year, so just 25 for the winner, and then 1 point for 10th place. So I'm not going to go over the championship standings because it's basically just identical to the race result. But in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren leads there with 27 points, Mercedes second on 25, Red Bull third with 18, 4th are Williams with 12, 5th Aston with 8, 6th Sauber with 6, and then Ferrari down in 7th with 5 points. Not a great start from them, already 22 points behind McLaren, and then Alpine, Racing Bulls, and Haas all with 0 points. So pretty interesting race. I would say if I were to directly compare against Brazil 2024, I think I would still choose Brazil, just because you could actually overtake in Brazil, whereas Australia today, overtaking was very, very difficult. It seemed like Antonelli and Piastri produced about 90% of the overtakes we saw today. Other than that, it was a pretty interesting strategic race with that rain shower towards the end. But nonetheless, I think the first third of the race was basically just I would say 2/3 of the race was basically just crashes and safety cars, and not really a whole lot there. But nonetheless, interesting first race. I think we did get a little bit of a glimpse of the pecking order, and we saw that McLaren were very, very fast today. So I definitely think they're going to be pretty heavy favorites going forward, like I said before. After that, I think the Red Bull's okay. I don't know if it's the second best car. Mercedes might be a little bit better. And then I would say Ferrari still fourth best. I think they're probably a little bit better than Williams, but just weren't able to capitalize on that pace today. So there you go. There's my review of the 2025 Australian Grand Prix. I'll be back tomorrow with my first power rankings of the season. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.